in a deficit of questions, so don't be shy. Get them into the chat and let's start the conversation. I'm going to start with the first one, and what we're going to do is just open it up to all presenters, and as you speak, we'll sort of add you to the roster. So the first question we have is, how do psychologists go about tackling safely and deconstructing the roots of coloniality in relational peer engagement?
Does one of the presenters want to take a stab at that?
Shoot, Jude, I just realized too, I'm supposed to be doing that. I'm sorry. I skipped out of my job. I'm supposed to name people to sort of take things on. But yeah, please, presenters.
I want to make sure I heard correctly the last three words: relational peer something. Does that mean relating to one's colleagues?
That is a good question. I'll repeat the question, and for those that put it in the chat, maybe you can chime in for a moment. Deconstructing the roots of coloniality in relational peer engagement.
Susanna, did you have some thoughts about that? Yep.
I do, but I'm not sure if my thoughts will actually match the question, so please forgive me if I misinterpreted your question. I'm taking this to mean, how do we do it in moment-to-moment engagements and among colleagues? And I think I'm just thinking of how divergence of opinion is very important, and how in each small group of people, that's a microcosm of the larger world that we're trying to change. And, you know, in a poignant way, even in school, I often notice that in class, we could sit around discussing liberation and social justice. But as soon as the class is over, certain students get ignored by their peers. And this is very obvious to me. For whatever reason that might be, I think that there is a sort of hypocrisy there that we need to examine and look at.
I'll chime in as well. Just adding to what Susanna said, conversations like these, when there are disagreements or divergence in thoughts, I think the beginning of that should always be with compassion and humility and understanding that there's a whole worldview that kind of built an individual to who they are today and how they have framed their world and how they're seeing things. So taking that framework and recognizing that they have an explanation for why they believe the things they do, and then addressing the conversation from that perspective is a great building point. Attacking people, calling them out, as Jack and Cynthia discussed, these are ways to push people away and maybe even further their unacceptance. And ways to bring them closer would be to encourage them to share their thoughts and explore why they believe the way they believe. Maybe share the experience of your side of the story and where you're coming from, and find a small compromise in the conversation. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to change their entire worldview. You don't have to change the whole conversation. Just beginning, putting a little seed in their mind. That's a great place to start.
Yeah, Ash, I think you speak to that you have a great point around sort of call-in culture versus call-out culture and sort of what that looks like. And I think there's some good arguments for there being a time and a place for a little bit more of a call-out culture, but that call-in culture, I mean, it reminds me of RBG's quote about, I'm going to butcher it, but saying something along the lines of, tell people what you want in the way that they can hear it and want to do it too. So to say it in a way that people want to join you in your efforts, you know, if we're not being received, then it's not as effective, certainly. Yeah, good point. Thank you. A next question that please feel free, anybody, to jump in on. This came from group 3. I think they were talking about it, but I like this question, so I wanted to share it with everyone. Traditional training in psychology is bumping up against the emerging decolonial model. What will this look like going forward?
I'll chime in a little bit. I think it will look messy. I think that's how it's going to look. That's how it looks right now. And I think that it ties in well with this relational piece, because that is where it gets really messy for a lot of people. And I think that when approaching this work, it's important to have that agent compassion to move this work forward. I think that when salience of the coloniality within us is brought up, there's a lot of normal reactions that people have, especially for people who have never experienced salience before. And those are things like defensiveness, judgment. Dr. B and I have recently started a project looking into it as like ideology, feelings of guilt and shame people experience, focus on their marginalized identities, fear of loss. There's all these really messy components that are happening all at one time within specifically people with agent ranks when they're confronted with this work. And I think really understanding that and understanding that the relational piece is going to have to be a really big part of transitioning to this decolonial model is really important. And it's something that I think is neglected in traditional trainings in terms of how does this personally impact our lives and us as clinicians, and what biases do I hold? But those are things that need to be acknowledged, brought out in the open, and accepted and worked through, I think, in order to move from this traditional place of silence, toward decoloniality as we're in now, to more of this decolonial model that we're aspiring toward.
Something I'm wondering about this, sort of going off on what Jack just said, how much did this quote unquote traditional model really speak to people anyway? Perhaps there is a part of all of us that never did agree with it. I'm just, making this assumption. And also when we use the word traditional, I'm thinking of different traditions across the cultures of the world and on this land where we're practicing psychology. I think psychology started a long time ago with indigenous psychology. So psychology was always practiced on this land, and long before, there was always traditional psychologies before what we are calling traditional psychology now, which kind of adds to my thought that maybe huge parts of all of us feel buried and don't really agree with what we are calling psychology now. So perhaps it wouldn't be as difficult as we think it is to include everyone and, proceed to the next place.
That is hopeful. Speaking of hope, the hopeful view. And I really appreciate your points around this idea that it's messy. It's going to get harder before it gets better. There might be messiness, but that there is this hope, as Susanna mentioned, that enough of us are frustrated with psychology today for different reasons, that it might be easier than we think. And I just also wanted to add that it made me think about, so sharing power is part of the decolonizing sort of, I'd say agenda, that feels gross as a word though, but decolonizing efforts, that part of it is trying to share power. And there's this neuroscience research on what our brain does when we're in a hierarchy. And when we're in a hierarchy, our empathic centers of our brain pretty much shut down. So like the activity lessens. And so our capacity for empathy shifts. And so that alone just speaks to the individual neurological impact of being in a hierarchy. So I wanted to add that as something I've been noodling on in terms of how it speaks to our need to de-hierarchicalize. Okay, Ingrid, I feel you coming. Are you going to?
No, yes, you see it. Well, I think we might have a couple more moments, but this one seems like a biggie. I'm curious about the nuance of accountability versus calling out, and that might take us to the end. But that's one to reflect.
So it reminds me a little bit of the distinction between someone trying to shame someone and someone holding someone accountable and therefore that person feeling shame. And so like it speaks a little bit to the intent of the calling in or calling out, I think, but also to this idea that being held accountable doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right? That's not an easy thing. We can feel all sorts of different emotions associated with that. And yet that's the work. And that's exactly what we should be doing and working through, as Jack referred to as well. But that's not the same thing as actively shaming someone in a way that sort of shuts down their capacity to engage. Other thoughts?
I would say accountability can be creative and constructive if there's kindredness, if there's a sense of being connected to one another in a positive dynamic, as opposed to retaliatory or competitive accountability. So that goes to your point, Kate, about the intention of accountability and what is the bond between the people who are being called into account.
Exactly, which really just brings us back to that power of the relationship. If we're not in relationship and making mistakes, that we can be constructively responded to by others and to help see our blind spots in relationship. It is so much harder to do that self-reflective work without that foundation. Other speakers or Jude or Dean? Looks like we're in the last moments, last kind of comments.
We are. So I don't know if there are any final reflections. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat, which is the program evaluation. So we have a couple of different options of getting CE. So if you've registered through the NHPA co-sponsorship, there's a survey for you. Otherwise, if you're just getting the CAMFT and NBCC certificate, there's another. And then please come and see us again. We have so many great offerings this spring. We're going to be building lots of offerings like this through the fall. And so please use this too. That's my plug for continuing education. Otherwise, do any of the presenters or faculty have any final thoughts?
I sure do. I always do. And it's again, in closing, I think just celebrating all of our time together the last 3 hours. I apologize for the colonial bug that must be running through my wires here. But I think the timing was impeccable, like you said. So I appreciate everyone's patience with that, but truly, I think for all of us participants, presenters, facilitators, just to kind of celebrate the inevitable decoloniality and liberation work that we did together today, and to just acknowledge one more time the work of the presenters. Today is like the culmination or the fruition of really so much work and development that each of our incredible presenters have done over the course of years. Some of these presentations have been bubbling and distilling and formulating for at least a couple years. So to really celebrate the fruition of our efforts today is what I'd like to leave with. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I actually got some incredible questions in the chat just now, so we'll be following up. For all participants, look forward to an email with a website where this content will be available later on, and so you can stay connected to this really important work. And you can always email me through continuing education. So thanks, everyone. Have a lovely day. I don't know if presenters want to stay behind, but everybody else is free to enjoy their Saturday. Thanks all.
Thank you all.